everyone, Kat here. So I ran a couple of crafting panels at Denver Comic Con, and I realized that there's a fair amount of you out there that get pretty frustrated when using Worbla, especially if you're new to it, because it has a tendency to create bubbles, especially when you're sandwiching EVA foam. So I am here to walk you through how to get rid of those bubbles, and I also have some tips and some tricks on how I avoid them. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm gonna just give an example. It's just a scrap piece as well as some scrap pieces of Worbla that I'm going to just make. I don't know, it could be a bracer, we'll say. But let me go ahead and get started. What I like to do, and you don't have to do this, is one side of Worbla tends to have a shinier side. That's where there's more adhesive. So I like to just mark that because when you heat it up, you lose, both sides become shiny. So I like to mark which side has that glue on it. So I like to put the two glue sides facing each other so that it has a stronger bond on these borders. Okay, so one of the tricks that I do when I personally work with Worbla is I actually like to leave one side open to let that air vent to prevent bubbles. So if you can see, usually what I'll do is I'll leave that open. That way, if I reheat the Worbla up, the air that expands has somewhere to go, and it's less likely to create any bubbles. So I'll just heat the 3 sides out of the 4. And then I have these are clay model tools. I really recommend these when working with Worbla. You can't really use the metal ones too much, but the wooden ones are really great. And they just come in handy when defining the edges of your EVA foam. So if you look, I actually still have this side open. And right now I don't think I have any bubbles that have occurred. Okay, so let's say I was making this into some type of bracer. What I'll do is I'll still leave that side open and I'll shape it with that area to vent. So I don't want to make this too hot because I'm going to be putting it on my skin to shape. But as you can see, still no bubbles. And then there's a bracer. What I'll do is I'll either let that cool, or what I also like to do is I like to just run that under cold water to harden it really fast, and then I can get working with it again. But then after that's all done, that's when I'll actually close that off. So I could just put it on the edge of the counter, reheat it, and seal it. But let's go ahead and seal it off, and let's purposely create some bubbles so I can show you how I get rid of them. So this is going to happen when you heat it up on the EVA foam and that air has nowhere to go, has nowhere to escape, and you just create all those bubbles. So the more heating you can do with your Worbla off of the foam, the better. But let's create these bubbles. So let's overheat this and you'll see them start to rise up. There they are. I almost burnt my Worbla. You can start to see it's getting a little bit white. So that's it, almost burning. So there's those bubbles. And what you're going to find is with most tutorials, they're going to tell you to pop the bubbles with something like a pin or a needle. And that's actually what I do. But what they, for some reason, tend to leave out is that you do not want to pop those bubbles when the Worbla is still warm or malleable. So you can either wait for it to cool, or what I like to do, and I actually do this a lot with my Worbla, is I run it under cold water, but for this tutorial, I just have a bowl of water. So I'm going to put this in cold water, and your EVA foam and your Worbla can get wet. It's absolutely fine. And this will just cool it down and harden it pretty quickly. So I'll even do that when I'm shaping stuff. So like I said, I'll put it on my wrist, and then I'll just put it under the water, and it'll shape it and keep it or cool it down immediately. So now I have a hard piece of Worbla and bubbles, which is what I wanted to get rid of. Okay, so what I'll do, it's hard now, and then I'll use a pin and I'll just put a hole straight in any of the bubbles. So I'm just gonna pretty much make a spot for the air to vent back out. So while I'm actually doing this, nothing is happening because the Worbla is hard. And the reason you don't want to do this when the Worbla is a little bit warm is because it tends to make it ripple or wrinkle, and those are really hard to get rid of. And it almost looks like pockmarks after you get rid of your bubbles. So I think that's all of them. Okay, so then what I'll do, and this is really, it's really handy to have a heating gun with the dual temperature. So I'll actually use a lower setting, and I'll just heat up one bubble at a time, pretty gently. Just heat it up enough to where it becomes malleable again. And then you just work your way from the outside of the bubble and just press to the center to where you made that hole. And then when you get all the air out, you just do one last little press to even it out. And you just do that on all the bubbles. So low setting, work your way from the outside in. Here's a big one. Let's get that one. If you heat it up on high, you'll just make the bubbles grow even bigger. So you don't want to do that. Okay, so if you look, I think I got all the bubbles out. Another thing I like to do a lot is you get a thick piece of EVA foam, at least 5 millimeters or more. And what you want to do is, if it's a flat piece of Worbla like this, you can just put it in between a table and the foam. But if it's rounded, you could always, if like for instance it was a bracer right now, you could always bend your EVA foam and press it on it that way. But what I like to do is I kind of like to gently heat it up with your low setting again to avoid those bubbles, so your surface is soft. And then I actually, I like, Erin, you can do the other side too, just so it's bendable. But then what I like to do is I just like to squish it. And what this is going to do is it's going to force that surface to smooth out again. So even if there are some bubbles left, it's going to spread that air so evenly that it won't look like there's bubbles, if that makes sense. So, I mean, look how, you can see, that's really flat. And I can try to peel this off, or I could put it in cold water, which is probably what I'm going to do. So usually I'd run this under a sink, but I'll just put it in cold water. It probably would have been smarter to use some wax paper in between that, because I guess I heated it up a little warm. But regardless, so now I have that flat surface again, which is pretty cool. So all those bubbles are gone. So let's say I was making a bracer. So I'm going to form this around my arm, and I'm going to do it on a low setting just to avoid creating any more bubbles. Plus, I don't want to burn my arm. And then I'm going to get its form, I'm going to dip my arm in the water. So usually it's a lot easier in a sink, I'm going to let you know. But for this purpose, I didn't want to be running back and forth to a sink. Okay. So we'll pretend that this is a perfect bracer. It's really not. I'm sorry. But it's just an example. But let's say for this example, it's perfect and I love it and I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. Let's detail it. So with your details, like I just have some scrap pieces here. With your details, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to heat up, like I said before, as much as your Worbla off of the EVA foam as possible. So you can heat these up on your high setting. If I was just doing trim, or let's say, so you can heat these up to be really hot, And since you need to heat up both pieces of Worbla that you're sticking together, I would use a low setting on your actual bracer. So just get it so it just starts to activate that glue. Okay, so then like I said, I'm gonna heat this guy up a lot. Okay, and so I didn't create any bubbles and it's ready for some trim. And so you can do the same thing. All right, and see, so even with the detailing, I didn't create any more bubbles. No new bubbles, and I mean, I know it's a little wonky because I had to dip it in a bowl. So I hope that tutorial helped you out and made you more confident when working with Worbla, because it's really a great material and I want you to love it as much as I do. If you like the tutorial, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel. It makes a huge difference for us. And if there's something else you want to see tutorial-wise, let us know in the comments and we'll see if we can make that happen. Thanks for watching.